Today we're talking to Ellie Bounds, who's one of the co-CEOs of BVN. BVN is 100 years old and in an exceptionally small percentage of firms that actually make it to this multi-generation. We're going to have a chat about what makes BVN special, their unique approach, but what has made them to be able to survive to this and what the future potential looks like for BVN in the industry and hold. Ali is the co-CEO of BVN, one of Australia's leading architecture and design firms. Ali has joined us today to have a bit of a chat on the podcast. And it also happens to be BVN has just turned 100. So we're very, very interested in having this conversation. Ali, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Ali, firstly, why don't we just start off with a little bit of your story? So, obviously you've grown through the ranks. You're probably one of the youngest CEOs in the industry. It's fantastic to see emerging leaders, and I will go for the yay for female leaders as well. So tell us a bit about what that's been like for you and how that's also emerged through BVN.
It's like, where do I start?
Start from the beginning. Start from where you worked and you graduated and how you've sort of worked and learned and developed through.
Sure. So BVN's been very good to me through the years. I've been with BVN now about 16 years.
Wow.
So I graduated from university and joined BVN because actually my kind of mentor at university was Wendy Lewin, recommended BVN to me and a contact. I know that Wendy is lots of people's kind of inspiration. And so I got the contact to BVN through her. I did about 5 years there and then went to the UK and did 2 years working overseas. And that whole time kind of James Gross stayed in contact with me and would come and visit in the UK when he was doing various things for work. And I guess I just kind of always knew I would come back. Mm-hmm. So cumulatively, I've been there 16 years, but I did have a little break in the middle.
And I think that's a great part too, because I mean, you're so lucky as designers and architects. I love in this profession, you're not stuck to one country. Like I've got a law degree. If I want to do that, it's very, very hard. Even to be a doctor, you have to go and requalify. Whereas as architects and designers, it is a global profession.
Yeah. And I think it's actually really good to kind of go work in other practices, see a little bit about what's going on. At the time, BVN didn't have a UK footprint, which we now fortunately do. But so I went and worked for a practice there for 2 years, and I'd actually done a year there for my year out between my undergrad and my master's degree, and at a firm called Sale in London. I am blessed with a British passport as well as an Australian, so it was very easy for me to.
But still, Australians, it's quite easy. It's not the hardest process, so that just makes life easier.
But it always made it kind of an easy kind of option to go there and work. So I did that, and I think like that was quite formative in terms of seeing how other practices worked, seeing cultures of different businesses. They always tended to be fairly large practice. Like I'd done a little bit of work through university in a small practice, and I just realised that wasn't for me. I really liked the buzz of a bigger environment where there were lots more people, kind of collegiate, collective is what kind of we refer to it. But I think that that culture of BVN was really something that kind of drew me in from the outset, and was always the thing that kind of drew me back. So.
Well, let's talk about it, because there's some interesting things out of there. I do want to talk about BVN. So firstly, let's start off, we normally do this. So tell us a little bit about BVN and who you work with, where you work and who you support.
Okay. So BVN is architectural practice, obviously, but we actually do have interest in other design areas. So we have some startups and some random little research projects that we do. Cool. There we have a product in New York called Reply, which is actually a kind of outdoor furniture startup company. So when there are things that kind of spike our interest, particularly if we're doing sort of research and development, it might spin off into something that's not traditional architecture, but typically, like we are an architectural practice.
We'll come back to that because that's something in itself as well I think is really important.
So we're an architectural practice here in Australia. It's on the 7th of August, we turn 100. We are about 300 people in Australia at the moment, or 350 people. And we have 7 in the UK now, and New York we've got 2 as well. we do all sorts of sector work. So from large defence projects, health hospitals, a lot of multi-residential now, a lot of civic and public buildings. So we're quite well known for our kind of public architecture and a very strong education sector as well. So we try to do everything from, precinct planning to workplace small interventions and fit outs. And I tend to specialize in education projects. So I kind of ended up in schools and tertiary environments, and have sort of, after a few major projects that were more kind of public, specialized, bespoke, lots of user consultation elements at the beginning of my career at BVN, like the Australian Embassy working with James Gross and the Westmead Millennium Institute, which was a research building. I then kind of found myself in schools and have just stayed doing that.
And it's quite interesting because I often say, obviously working in firms and working across the industry, we really try to understand who people are and unpack that. And you'll sometimes find that people will find their sectors, right, that they love. Education has a lot of that consultation up front. Yep. If it is government related, there's generally a program and it runs and it goes through. It's got its pluses. It's also got its challenges, and then you'll find people who are more in the commercial sector maybe very much enjoy that pace and that quick turnaround, what it is. Yep. And then you've got health, where health, you find health, transport, data centers, very technical buildings, lots of service driven, lots of consultant coordination elements like that. Yep. But it's interesting how the sectors do attract different people. What's been the thing for you? Why education?
I think it was very much that front end piece, the kind of user engagement, people engagement, being able to kind of synthesize what the client's asking for in a brief and finding that extra bit that maybe they haven't asked for, that's the opportunity in the design, and really navigating the conversations, translating between kind of the perfunctory brief to what then becomes the kind of magical moments in the building. And I think I started to get quite a strong interest in the different styles of learning that were then reflected in different ways of responding to that. So, and I think actually since having had kids myself, it's also been quite interesting to see that reflect in their experience at school. So
yeah, I'm very interested in that. How do you find that? Because I must say, as a parent, I go to different, schools and I look at things and I go, I don't know if that's quite what's going to work for my kid. And how have you found that? Now,
yeah, I mean, I think that probably the thread that's going to keep coming back through this conversation is that ultimately a lot of it comes from the culture and the people, whether that's the work that, the practice that we're a part of, that I'm fortunate enough to be a part of, but the schools, the schools that we work with, understanding their kind of unique values proposition and the unique way in which they implement kind of pastoral care and their pedagogy of teaching will inform a different response, a different architectural response, but ultimately the leadership and the people in the school make so much of a difference to the students' experience of it. So not to underplay the architectural intervention, I think we really elevate that, but it's about the people. So when I see my kids in a space, if they're in a kind of warm, supportive environment that's giving them that opportunity, I think that's the most important bit of it. But
and at the end of the day, the architecture is also determined by the property. It's determined by what you can do. It's determined by the budget, and it's making it the best in that. But it is, that link between the pedagogy and the culture. And I love it when you said unique value proposition, because at the end of the day, people actually forget schools are a business.
Yeah,
right. Whether they're government funded or not, at the end of the day, you need to have students in, retaining, doing all of that. And it is, people will go to a school. Yes, there's a location element, but people will also choose a school based on their ethos as well. And I know, having my first one go to school in the last year, even though lots of little options around me, I was like, oh, this one's like kind of what I would do, why I would go here. And I think particularly when you're getting to private schools, obviously that UVP is exceptionally defined in their culture and their point of difference. And I will say the architecture definitely becomes an element, particularly in those elements as well. But I'm really interested, I mean, before we get on to the BVN and the culture and the 100 years, and I want to get into a little bit of the history. I think there's a really interesting element there that I see as a transferability, and I'm interested in what that looked like. Being involved in education, listening to things, understanding, condensing that down, and then putting that into action.
Yep.
How you've also seen that translate into your career and the skills that you've learned to develop to obviously become a leader, and now a leader of a business as well.
Yep. I think there's a lot in terms of like as an architectural or as an architect and responding to architectural briefs, the kind of project management side of things, but also the ability to communicate and sort of have clarity in that, and let's say kind of organize the various voices and views, of which there are many in architectural projects, particularly of scale.
And in architecture firms.
And in architecture firms. I think like my experience was I came in as a graduate and I was given a lot of opportunity, I think, to work in teams where I had that kind of face-to-face with clients and was able to flex that muscle a little bit in terms of understanding how to navigate people of different backgrounds and different needs and desires, and that enabled me to grow in the business. And I was supported by the leadership of the business at the time in terms of just stepping through that. I was never particularly aspirational in that in terms of wanting to climb, but I think that my experience just meant I went into more challenging kind of environments of different projects and different scales. And then in 2019, I was asked to become a partner of the business.
Wow.
And BVN is a bit unique because we are 15 equal owners of the business. So all of us are equal, which is not a common model.
Which I'm going to have a conversation about that because it's a very interesting approach. Yeah.
So quite interesting at the age that I was at as well, kind of with some of my partners being, much more experienced in their career. And I think it just demonstrates that kind of supportive collegiate environment.
Yeah.
And that I think the thing I hadn't liked about smaller practice was how sort of isolating it was, and the process in a bigger environment, bigger business where we had more flexibility, more support, was the way in which I work was very much around kind of bouncing ideas and working as a team, and it being very much co-created. And I felt like I could be more ambitious in that because, or felt I had a safety net around me all the time with a very supportive environment around me. Whereas I think it's quite isolating. Like I personally would find it quite isolating being a sole practitioner and kind of having to launch yourself into those things on your own. So I think that really worked very well for me to just naturally kind of push myself and grow into different environments.
Kind of feel like when you're pushing it for the business, you're actually, if you do have that collective mentality, you feel like you're doing it for the good of others as too, and it's a real team as well, like a family in that way, as in, we're all together supporting each other.
Absolutely. I think, and there is a very familial kind of feel about our culture. But I think that, that always meant that I felt kind of invigorated. I obviously loved architecture and what I was doing. And then after becoming a principal in 2019, 2 years ago, I took on this role with Neil. And again, the fact that it's actually a co-CEO model, I would never have said yes to it on its own.
Okay.
Because I think we are, we're collaborative humans. That's and having being able to drive strategy and work towards thinking about the business is so much more rewarding in my mind. Doing it together, we can kind of move things along together, and you always have a sounding board. And then we have a bigger sounding board group of our equal partners that we're obviously always interacting with as well. So
let's go back a step. Let's talk about the history of BVN. So it is turning 100. So it was obviously founded in 1926. I better get my numbers right.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about where it started, how it's sort of grown, and then I am interested in, obviously you have a little bit of history, but then how that's also now emerged from Australia to New Zealand. So particularly for those listening in.
So It started in Queensland at 1926. I think one of the kind of things about BVN that's been quite interesting is that over the years it has had lots of different kind of people of influence and significance that have changed its path, and that's meant it's been very I'd say it's been very resilient as a result of it. So there have been lots of more like mergers than acquisitions. So people coming into the practice, some form of shared sector opportunity. So, for instance, when Lawrence Neild came into the business, there'd been a collaboration already going on prior to him officially joining the practice. And that was due to some of his particular expertise in health. And so a lot of the kind of evolutions of the business as it's grown have been due to these sort of
mergers
connections and different partnerships,
and then doing. And it's quite interesting because I often, we obviously work across the industry, we work with different people in different elements. One of those elements is that we do search and we help businesses to work out partnerships, whether it's JVs and mergers and acquisitions, or whether it is finding their talent to do that. And it's quite interesting when we talk about that. I think there is a power first in JVs and partnerships. And I often talk about it's kind of like dating, right? Like you don't go and get married straight away. It's a fantastic way to sort of work out, are our values aligned, whether you've got the intention to start off in that way or whether it's just that it happens by chance. And it's quite interesting to have that understanding, because I think the unique thing about BVN is, one, there is very few firms who are actually Brisbane started, who are at the size and scale, who have grown nationally. So I know you started in Sydney in what year? Was it?
You're going to test me here. I'm not going to be able to tell you. It was
20, 30 years ago, I think
it was about 30 years ago, yeah. So
let's go with it. Just pre-Sydney Olympics.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Exactly.
So, and then now Brisbane sits at about 60, is that right? Sydney is actually the largest, about 120.
Sydney's about 200, and Brisbane is getting close to 100. So we've actually got quite a few in Canberra at the moment as well, because we're working on some work down there. But we have had times where we've had other studios as well. We did actually have a official Canberra office and a Melbourne office at one point, and I think about 15 years ago, we retracted them back into Sydney and Brisbane, just to ensure that the leadership and the culture of the business was a little bit more united. And it's another thing that's been actually quite good about the co-CEO model. The fact that Neil is in Brisbane and I'm here is also, we're very connected to the two studios. So I think it's the evolution of BVN over the 100 years has very much been this kind of merger mentality. And a lot of that time has come from a project opportunity where we've been working together already and see the potential of cross-pollinating some of the learning from different sectors, or just expertise from a different place. So the likes of James Gross or Donovan Hill when they came into BVN as well. And again, like we've been working, the collective we, obviously that's before me.
It is always on me, yeah.
They had been collaborating and seen synergies and opportunities. So that's really what's seen that grow.
Though, because we've got that conversation in partnerships, but actually one of the things that often gets difficult is when you actually do say, okay, if we are going to come in, and I'm assuming obviously it's written into your constitution of what those shares look like, but it's a very different offering being given a percentage of the share versus coming into a well-established business at a tier one design level and getting an equal potential share in it. And I think that I'm interested in what your view is. My view would be that would be very appealing for somebody who's already independently running their own business versus somebody who's going to be given, and it's a conversation that we have with people, how to potentially structure these things. I don't know if you're happy to share or to comment on that.
No, I can comment on it. I mean, there are pros and cons, because I think for someone coming in from another practice who may have been the sole beneficiary of
Mm.
the success or otherwise of the business, comes with a lot of stress. But at the same time, and obviously the support of having 15 partners means
Mm.
that stress is distributed, shared. I think if that business is doing very well, they can actually stand to be
Mm.
quite successful off that as a single practitioner.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing, like we do look at it a lot. Like quite often we just sanity check that the model still is working and is the right thing for the future of the business, because it also means you can't just have thousands of
Yeah.
partners.
Yeah.
And so for people in the business, there are lots of other models that you see out there of other architectural practices where there are lots of principals who maybe don't have equity, or they might have a small amount of equity.
Mm.
But I think the kind of cultural piece of how it influences the way we think about our approach to the practice as custodians, because no one, BVN aren't here anymore,
Yeah.
running
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
business. So we are all custodians that are just kind of handing that on to the next group. And I think our responsibility is to ensure that it's still there to be handed on.
Continues on.
So
And I
it's
love
got pros
that.
and cons.
I love that model in that thinking, and I'm really interested to unpack that a little bit, because I think it's I'm interested in how, as a culture, you have created this custodian type model. Obviously, it is through multi-generational. How many generations are you up to now? 6 or 7?
Yeah, say so.
I would say you would be in a very, very small percentage of firms. I presented on this at the ADRs 30 under 30. It's a very, very small percentage that make it sort of, the percentages go down quite enormously. So, and it's what that looks like within that ongoing model. I mean, when we look at engineering firms, it's generally different. They'll grow, be bought out by internationals, because majority of the industry is run by internationals and your competitors, and if you're building services, then that gets laid out by the infrastructure side of things. So it's a very different sort of business models in themselves. But when we look at architecture firms, obviously you would be one of the very few firms who are. Let's say it's like the 200 who sub that, and now you've gone to the international, which I'm interested in that too. But this custodial kind of part of handing it on, what does that look like from a cultural part and a leadership part, and when you're selecting who's invited into that, and what that looks like and influences when you're around the board table as well?
It's a complex question. I think the answer to that is it's half kind of values based and half skills based, and it's also a compositional thing. So the composition of the principal group is kind of always evolving over the generations. It's evolved, and they've, you made a comment at the beginning of this before when you were trying to relax me. The kind of comment around the more gregarious individuals, or those that have a personality that is much more extroverted and wants to be the kind of design showman, versus others who are very good at running a project and good with clients. Or I think it's always important to look at the whole composition and think about the fact that you're never going to get somebody who's able to fully replace the skills of someone else. We're all different. But what sort of unites us all together has to be a values sort of position, that it feels like quite familial, and that we trust one another, because we also don't have any, because of the even distribution, we don't have any KPIs, because obviously if I were working on, the sector that I work in, the project typologies tend to be smaller than, say, if you're working in a typology of health. So to disincentivize the group from kind of all wanting to do the big beast projects that might make more money, which is what would end up happening if you started to have a kind of KPI model, you need to just fully trust each other that you're bringing, equal value and in whatever it is that you're doing. And that stems to more than just the project space. It's also roles within the business. So, each of us do different things in the business. and have different focus areas to make sure that, those things are moving along. And we have to kind of trust each other to do that. So I think that's part of what, part of the criteria that goes into the thinking about the next custodian, that they very much understand that. And it is sometimes a difficult sort of mindset shift for somebody who's come from a different type of practice to come into a space where
and it's often, you hear that old term of, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I mean, strategy is very important as you are leading that. You need to know where you're going, what you're doing, make sure it actually happens. Steering the ship, I suppose. But at the end of the day, ships can get very off course very quickly. I have a part that I talk about that culture is a living organism, right? And that we are all part of that culture. And it shifts and changes, right? And it's constantly moving and evolving as we bring different people in, different decisions. It might be a good year, this is happening, that's happening, different pressures on it. But we all have to have our underlying values of what we believe in, what we're aligned to, and know who we are and know what the right thing is. Some of those decisions can be really difficult because you might have somebody who can bring in millions of dollars a year, but they may actually deteriorate the culture or how they operate. And it's being able to be very true to who you are as an organization and know that. And that's what I'm really interested in with BVN, because obviously I have met lots of the, directors and principals over time. And everyone that I meet of you, I feel an underlying element that is there. It's interesting when you said about, we were having that pre-chat of different personality types, and I had this conversation with somebody yesterday. I often say the people who are often best at their job are the ones who are the worst people at selling themselves. We had that little pre-chat. So, you don't want to sell yourself. Because often people just go, well, this is the job. I just get it done. I don't need to tell people. But at the same time, in building an organization, we all need different personalities. We all need different, cognitive diversity, cultural diversity, a different perspective to bring in. And there is that balancing act too within that. And it sometimes, when you're talking about national or now an international organization as well, what that looks like, and I often talk about it like a family, is that every studio may have its own personality, like a child, or its own departments may, again, because it might be client types, how the projects operate. But interestingly, if we know who our values are, we come back to that. And that's what we're aligned and connected to. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how BVN has done that, or how you do that, and talk about those values and things that are really important to you?
Sure. I mean, our kind of ethos is around this sort of idea of collective creativity to design a better future. I think the principles of that are really about trying to better the planet from a sustainability perspective. But I would argue more about places for people, just places that respond to the needs of that locale and that urban environment. And a lot of the work we've done has tended to, have civic influence. It's they're kind of public places, places that people really kind of gravitate back to, like Marrickville Library, or there's some more prominent current ones like fish markets and things. But I think the ones that really resonate with people are often actually things like the Kinghorn, which is a cancer centre. It's a research building, but it had a place for people and making them feel welcome and warm. And I think that has always kind of driven the thinking of our projects. So it's a sort of environmental betterment, but it's very much around kind of improving the way of life of people through the architecture and the way in which it connects people together, or gives them a sense of belonging. So I think BVN definitely is, whilst it's about people connecting with each other in the practice, we do really always want to strive for the best design. We're quite kind of critical of our design process, and have recently actually kind of looked at that as a process that we can teach people in the studio about how how we actually approach design, and be quite methodical about evaluating that and the quality of what we're putting out there. And I think that really does underpin all of the work that we do. We will
Mm.
pursue work all over the world for the work. If it's good work, we'll go to where the good
Yeah.
work is, rather than just taking on stuff that's here because it's here, if you know what I mean.
And to be absolutely honest with you, when you describe that, that just sounds like the absolute ultimate that most architects want to do, but also, most people who are running firms want to be doing too.
Mm.
And I think the elements are there is that, somebody said to this early when I came into the design industry, is that most architects and designers are actually humanitarians. They want to make a difference to the world. They want to make things better.
Mm.
And you will find that, we always ask people, why did you want to do architecture? And it'll give us it gives us an insight into who they are and things, but you can also hear the underlying factors. And most of that is because place, I could see the difference it made and I want to make a difference. And I think that, as you've said, you've selected the industries that you feel that you can make a difference in. It also sounds like you've also been able to, through design, let's put it in general terms, sort of through a design excellence,
Yep.
trying to drive that and what that looks like. Have they also, and it's that continuous improvement approach. It sounds like you also have a culture where you're constantly looking at what do we do better? How
Yep.
can we do that better? Is this working? And constantly, is that
Yep.
continuous improvement is an underlying, I don't know
Absolutely.
what
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like you've read the analysis of our BVN 100 reflections, but I think we have had the opportunity this year to kind of look back at, the principal group's kind of looked back and had lots of conversations with past principals and alumni, and the thing that keeps on resonating is people, and the value of the connections that were made. But it's also this constant kind of drive to learn from what we do and change that, evolve that, do better. I think
Yeah.
we are also quite unique in the regard, maybe not unique, lots of practices do this too, but we would certainly say it's a point for us that we're not looking the same. We don't have a house style. So
Yeah.
things sort of respond to their place, and we try very hard to make them respond to their place
Yeah.
specific. And you mentioned earlier the difference between studios in different spaces. The architecture in Queensland that we produce is feels different to the architecture in Sydney.
Mhm.
But the architecture in Sydney also feels different depending on whether it's in one
Yeah.
suburb or another. So we very much try to create a
Positive.
response that is place specific, values specific, and also sort of trying to challenge the way in which we do things in terms of thinking about
Which does
innovation.
come down to the design process, right? It's sort of like good design isn't what looks pretty, it's actually what's responsive to what you're building to and you're doing. So what else came out of that? As you said, you've sat down with everybody, you've looked at all of this. I think when we first went to book this and you're about to start, and I
Yeah.
think you've had that session. So let's talk about, here's your opportunity, because I know I can tell you're not somebody who likes to sell too much, but give us what are the underlying parts that you've found that makes BVN, you believe you've got to here today and makes you successful and unique.
Well, I mean, as I said, like there's the kind of collegiate nature of all the people that have come together, and those pretty impressive individuals that have made decisions in its evolution around what sort of typology of work they're going to go and pursue, or what kind of impact to the city they would strive to bring. So I think the appreciation of the people in the past that have contributed to the opportunity in the future. One of the other sort of elements, I guess, that has come out of it is that comment around like becoming, this desire to kind of keep evolving ourselves and keep striving for something better. There's been actually quite a lot of, again, prior to me, but a lot of innovations in terms of technologies, appetite towards picking up computational technologies early in the piece when those weren't as kind of common in architectural practice, as well as innovations in kind of material testing and fabrication, which has led out to sort of certain spin-offs and things. But also that partnership piece. So whether it's with universities or governments or externals outside of architecture, I think the recognition of that influence that has had on our longevity as well, and our ability to kind of continue to innovate and think about things a little bit differently. So, I think we have always, it appears that the business has always had this kind of appetite to change and to evolve and to keep doing that, to be agile and to have this sort of breadth of sector experience as well, so that we don't end up in something that has kind of dropped out, the bottom's dropped out of it.
And the elements there we've talked about is you've got a cultural element there, a strategic element, but obviously then in the background, diversification within regions and sectors, and still keeping to the alignment values. Now, obviously that's looking back. Now, looking forward, what does that look like? We're obviously in a very interesting time. We generally ask this in the podcast of, where we see the challenges and the opportunities, but we're doing this as a bit of a lens with where you're at as a business at the moment. Now you've got that. What does that mean for those custodians and what you set for that next generation, and setting what continues to help you to go to 200 years?
I think it's a very interesting moment in time, and lots of questions around AI and how that's going to affect the way in which we're working. We are obviously testing lots of that stuff, and I think we've done a lot of computational design kind of innovation over the years. Technology innovations, we're very, very interested in ways in which we can kind of streamline fabrication and opportunities for bringing costs down in housing and all those. I know that probably every architect that comes on here talks to you about those things.
Not necessarily. Everybody has their different parts, and I think it's I'll just take a segue. I mean, I know, being in your Sydney studio, I obviously get to visit lots of studios, right? And there's where I think this innovation. We're going to talk about AI in a minute, but the Sydney studio and Brisbane studio are obviously different studio types. When I walk into a studio, I'm often looking at the studio, and it gives you an idea about who it is, what the philosophy is behind. One of the most interesting things I found in your studio was it is fully agile. Now, everybody talks about agile. I've never seen a studio or an office built this agile. You have things on your roofs that you actually can move around, so people can actually move into different areas and collaborate together. It's something that, having worked with workplace designers, you hear about, but I think that sort of speaks to when you are thinking about what you're doing. Obviously your walls are covered in different designs and 3D printing and those types of things, and I think you still have somebody build some models.
We do. We have
incredible.
An 89-year-old model maker.
I must actually say, I actually think, even though there are beautiful studios out there, it was actually, and I have mentioned to other people, it's actually one of the most impressive studios from a design and way of working for designers, that I think works quite well. But as we're about to move into AI, things are going to change enormously. We are going to have somebody talk about the future of work in AI and how that might change design. Let's talk about that into context of what you think that may potentially do, and then we can talk about, modern construction methods. What do you think this might look like for architecture and design and the industry of consultants, and what that might look like for the next, both in how we're working, but how this actually may look as a conversation of firms and how we go about interacting together as well?
I mean, our studio, I think, is as you've reflected, a real insight into part of our culture, and one of the best things about it, I think, is that it's kind of messy and hackable, and we pilot everything. And as you said, there's robotically printed things on the ceiling with ducts and stuff that we've tested. We're really unprecious about it, and I think that's a really important kind of characteristic of the way that we work. Post-COVID, we came back into the studio, and we're very flexible as well, I think, as part of the sort of cultural support. We don't make everybody come in full time. It's a 50%. They can flex however they want during the week, their time. But we have also seen a company that is so driven by its culture and by the collective collegiate work. It is really important also to kind of draw people in to be able to do that together. And I still very strongly believe it's an endeavor that needs to be done together. And we've got lots of physical models in the studio. There's still tactility that's required in the process of design, and in terms of understanding spatial experiences and understanding materials. And so I think our tools are changing, and we are seeing we don't need as much physical desk space as we have in the past, which is partially to do with, flexible working, but also partially to do with the tools that people are using. But slightly controversially, I still think there will be a place for that type of design, particularly in the front end, to actually make sure that we understand what it is that we're outputting. We're not just generating things that that we don't fully grasp the spatial context of, or the material influence of. So I still think there's a space for it, and it is something we are talking about at the moment, because we kind of coming up to a period of time where we're looking at whether we revamp our studio, because it's been a while, and it's tricky to know how much of that to give away, and also
and what it's going to look like too. And I mean, I think and I was having this conversation with somebody else, because often designers design workplaces, right? And they often make those workplaces like how they would work, right? But a design studio is a very different workplace to most workplaces, and it is very collaborative. It's interesting when you talk about that, because obviously when we talk about BIM and M360 being built, one of the biggest things is like, great, but how is that actually built? How can you touch and feel it? It's interesting how, you can type a note up, but if you handwrite the note, it actually has a different cognitive connection to our brains. And so I think there's lots that we can do to learn. AI is going to change massive amounts. Obviously, we can produce versions, as you say, in computational design. You guys have been doing that for a while. Produce lots of options that can happen, but still the collaborative approach of where design and what needs to be done, the learning and things like that isn't changed.
I think very much the critical thinking that you require to be, if, in terms of, to go back to the kind of value proposition of us, I think the design excellence piece, very few people are just kind of born with the ability to decipher or do that. So that's requires a certain amount of tutelage and the ability to watch what somebody else is doing in terms of how they're going to detail together a building and what the resolution is going to be like to have that full experiential kind of impact. And it does depend on how much you value all of those sort of tectonic things in the built form. And but I still, I recognize in my experience the sort of one-on-one relationship that I got with watching James Gross sketch, and you need to experience that to a certain extent to learn, and you can't shortcut that. So we have a sort of responsibility, and I think part of that kind of BVN 100 reflection is the responsibility that we have to kind of continue to be able to pass that down to next generations, to give them those skills to interrogate, to critically think, to discern, even if they're not going to have to spend 18 hours documenting door schedules like they used to. Hopefully that's not a thing they're going to have to do, but that you still are able to sit around a table and kind of look at how you've analyzed tectonically putting something together, or how the design thinking emerged and got challenged collectively in a group. And you have to do that. Kind of, that takes time, and you have to do it together as a group. So I think that there will still be a place for that. And I think we recognize that's kind of part of our legacy responsibility to educate.
And I think that's the element. We've had two things. We're coming a bit of full circle here. Obviously, looking at pedagogy and how people learn and what those elements are. Then, I mean, we had this conversation previously that if you looked back in the 70s, if we had gone looking back BVN back then, you could have had 200 people, but they would have been on drafting boards, right? Even probably about to 1990. Then obviously we moved into 2D. Then we've had BIM come forward, and now it's like, okay, great, you can build in BIM. How's it going to be documented for the builder to actually build that? that element of learning what those things are, how things are actually built, how things actually go together, that's what we're designing for. It's
Yep.
just something to actually be physically built currently by a person and probably by people for, I know Roberts are coming, but it's very intricate work. And so I think there's this part that, yes, AI is coming. Yes, it's going to be able to do repetitive tasks. I believe the next evolution for design will be in the documentation. At the end of the day, it's standards and things like that. There's probably a lot of firms going to be working on that.
Yep.
But I'm interested in, and obviously you're grappling with this conversation at the moment, in the same way that some people miss things from the drawing board to 2D and 3D, how we now, in a world where you can literally put in anything and something to give you, it's going to have an effect on the way that our brain actually works. So the way our connections happen.
Yep.
And I'm interested in then, it is one of those things because lots of these tasks were actually done by graduates. And how are these things as a learning, doing, but also learning process? How do you think as an industry, or the principles that are going to have to happen to still be able to teach somebody the craft of design? And it's not in creating a pretty picture. There's elements, as you said, in stakeholder understanding the brief, doing that, designing to it, but then being able to still know actually build these things of actually how things are built. Do you think it'll change? It means people can go out to site more. Do you think I'm interested in what you think.
I mean, I think it will change. The documentation side of things, as you say, is definitely the biggest sort of sink of time and resource, and it's where we're competing most with other architects in terms of particularly things like offshoring. That phase of it, it's not something we really we've struggled with the kind of values proposition on that. So I think there's definitely the space where there will be the biggest opportunity to streamline things. But I definitely still think that you have to be able to give graduates and early career architects the opportunity to see how others are designing and working, and the creative thinking process, to engage with clients and understand when a request comes in about how you synthesize that into a design response, and also to see how it gets put together. I mean, we do rely on tools more for things that I think projects are getting more complex as well. We take on some of the most complex projects, the likes of Atlassian and Fish Markets was no walk in the park, and Sirius, which was an adaptive reuse, tiny spaces to try and get new services and compliance with, and the likes of that. And I think if you look at Atlassian, the BIM model for that is out of this world. It's so highly coordinated, and you couldn't deliver a building that's that sort of complex with the timber interface and the steel and concrete without something that powerful to sort of understand how everything is going together.
Yeah,
so
wow.
it's working for us in that regard, but still the guys on site are living that experience of how it then comes together and having to learn from that and respond. And so that, I think there will always be a place for that on site you have to actually work out how to do this mind-blowing fire engineered detail between a timber floor and it's just, there's so much curly stuff in that building that it isn't normal and has to be, engineered and have performative solutions made. And in order to do that, you really have to have learnt those things to be able to apply that kind of critical thinking to innovate. So I think for us, getting to a point, for us, the ability to kind of innovate and push into those really complex projects, I think they will still always, people will see the value of good design in doing that, and that you can't get that through standard repeated details from AI or.
Well, and I mean, look, the end of the day, AI is, and we can put it in AI and we can also put it into automation using technology, right? It's a difference, but in essence, a business is a system and a process, but it's then individualized to each project. So it sounds like, in building those highly complex models, you've also built a system where we have the ability to deliver at this size and scale and this complexity, and to be able to use these different construction methodologies that can be complex and integrated.
Yeah.
That's two things I want to go on to next. Is just, you talked a bit about, potentially, because I'm looking at this as the challenges we know are in the industry, and obviously construction costs are one. You did open that up before and mentioned about buildability,
Yep.
right, and construction methods. How do you see that in Australia? Because obviously the costs are not going down anytime soon. We have governments with massive debts, but lots of infrastructure to build. It's not just governments, but we have high interest rates, well, raisable interest rates again, that are probably quite consistent and may only go up. What are the things that you think for Australia, and what you guys are looking at and working on at the moment?
So I guess we've kind of always been interested in DfMA, or design for mass assembly, and modular methods of construction, whatever the catchphrases we want to use at the time.
Everybody uses something different.
But I mean, I think the kind of kit of parts approach is not new, and is certainly a methodology that we've applied from workplace and schools, interior fit outs and the like, all the way to large scale building. And I think using kind of standardized pieces to enable you to do things that are unique and tailored is the sweet spot for us, because once you go into a kind of volumetric design piece, or a pattern book approach to, say, schools, for instance, or even housing, sometimes I think you're losing the ability to kind of design tailor to that particular place or that particular value set, or that. So when we talk about schools, I think that a lot of the success of a design is actually gained in the master planning and the siting and the sort of the thinking about the early moves that can make a difference. And then the way in which you actually articulate the building, put it together, can vary from a cost perspective. But you can make spaces that respond to the needs of the users and age appropriate responses using pieces that are repeatable, but still allow you to actually create a unique response. And I think that's where the kind of clever design comes in, because that's how we're going to get efficiency in terms of bringing down the cost of these things. And there are examples like ANU was something we did a while back, but that was very innovative in terms of the facades being brick and feeling like a masonry building, but actually they were all prefabricated and brought in and assembled with something ridiculous like 8 people to put this whole building together, with CLT and other elements in it. I think, in my view, that's the way to maintain a quality response that doesn't end up with everything kind of feeling homogenous. But getting efficiencies in terms of the way that we minimize the wastage, that we can do things quickly, and bring down cost and actually make things accessible to the general public. So we're doing some work with Homes New South Wales at the moment that is based on essentially a system that's sort of 600 panels. And again, each of the housing responses is unique, but it's using a kit of parts that is
brilliant,
easy to make.
And I think that's where the value of architects in the future is too. I think one of the interesting things is that people often, and graduates sort of come in, it depends how you train yours, but you often see people in the industry, they think design is about the beautiful, pretty thing. But actually design, as we've talked about, is to the place and what it's doing, but it is also to make sure the project happens, and actually understanding different construction methodologies and modern ones, and how can we actually reduce the cost but still come out with a great design outcome. I see that is actually the value of wild architects and designers, and I think that role will continue to, evolve, and become more important than just something that looks Instagram worthy.
Totally. It's a negotiation. Yeah,
and I'm interested then, sorry, this leads on, I often have these moments where something leads to something. I'm interested in now where the value, I think this is a conversation that's now happening for architects. what the value of architects is, because, generally we do it on a percentage of built percentage, or we do it on fees and things like that. Whereas I'm starting to hear in what you've mentioned, I think the value is now for architects to be able to be more those advisors on what is your project, what do you need done, and let's find the right construction solution with the right design outcomes that are going to meet in the place. Is that something, and then how they can potentially go from charging a fee to potentially being involved in more of another way of value adding? It depends, because if you're working for government, that's a bit different to if you're working for a developer.
I don't think there's a simple answer to that, actually. I mean, I do think there is an advisory, there's an opportunity for an advisory role, and I think our position has tended to be one of feeling that we can improve the outcome for people on any project, and just wanting to try and do that. And I know that sounds a bit ideological, but
Yeah.
but I do think, like, sometimes we've had clients come to us where, you look at their sustainability aspirations aren't quite where we'd like them to be, but I think through coming to us, we're able to then push the envelope to create something that's going to be a better outcome overall for the individuals and for the environment. Where rather than saying no to that project, we kind of look at the opportunity we can bring to that to improve that for everybody.
Yeah.
Because if they go with somebody else, for sure, it's not necessarily going to end up with that same outcome. So trying to sort of bring the best to each project. And so sometimes that's just a design advisory role, and we will do that. We will, work with partners like Committee for Sydney to help do case studies and demonstrate things where you are more informing an approach rather than actually an architectural design that we're doing. So we're always looking for opportunities to collaborate like that, and to kind of learn from others in the industry as well. So I do think there is a place for that, but I actually think in order to be able to advise on that well, you still need to be able to be the safe set of hands that has seen a project, a really complex hospital, all the way through to being built and complying with all of the difficult nuances of that and the stakeholders and things. And I think that's where where we've often had kind of long-term repeat clients, is because we are able to demonstrate that kind of delivery success, and that informs the ability to then have credibility when you're doing advisory pieces at the front as well. So
no, absolutely. And I think the role of architecture will change slightly. Now, I'm looking at the time. I think we have covered off quite a little bit. We could probably keep talking. I am obviously pushing you and pushing your brain on a lot of things, because it's nice to talk to somebody who's at that level. Last sort of thing I do want to cover off on is obviously, where the future is. If you were to give advice to those coming into the industry and looking at a career ahead, so whether they're graduates or focusing on the next sort of 10 to 20 years, what are the types of skills that you think are most important that they learn and develop?
I mean, I still think that the sort of critical thinking piece around being able to sort of understand the value of design, and how you kind of test, and how you can think about that, about society critically, and how you can think about the influence of space and design. I think that technology, there will be people who can use different kind of AI and technology that is moving so fast that we're going to have to look outside of our workforce to stay kind of constantly up to date on that. And I think the reality is that we will kind of go and find people that have that expertise, and it changes so quickly that it will be more of a kind of contractor role to bring in and pollinate the practice, and then keep it evolving, because actually the ability for that to happen in the practice naturally, with the speed of which things are moving, is I don't think is actually going to be able to be achieved. So if you're trying to do that from within, build those skills yourself inside the
Yeah.
business, I think you'll struggle to keep up. So really, what you need to be able to do is to think critically about it, to build relationships, um, to be able to communicate really well, because that's actually most of what we do, I think, is kind of
Yeah. Communication,
communication. So
people, and all of those elements.
yeah,
And also, I think and this has come up more recently as well, I think it's really important for the next generation. They need to understand the business side as well. They don't necessarily need to be accountants or anything like that, but just understanding of what that is and how it then applies to them. And I think that's because it's the context as well of the larger world that you're working in, the business that you're in, but also, the larger world that it helps you to do.
yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Ellie.
Sorry, I was going to say one last thing is I think you really need to like what you do. So just enjoy it. Like that's definitely, because we spend a lot of time together doing these things, and
Totally.
the
And
enjoyment
the
of it.
people you work with and the
Yeah,
right values. I think, particularly for architects, there is thousands of firms, right? So
yeah.
as you said, you tried something, it wasn't for you, found something else. It is, I think BVN, I'm quite impressed. A lot of the large firms do. I think you have actually good cultures, but it can be dependent in which teams and what it is.
Mm.
I must say, I think you guys live the ethos as well. And that probably speaks from your numbers and what that looks like in your business. Um, last question we always sort of ask. I didn't get to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about the UK and London
Oh
and New
yes,
York as well, and that expansion. I don't know if you've got 5 minutes for us to cover off on that
sure.
or not, but so how did all of that come about?
So New York, Bill Dowser went over to New York. I think it was about 12 years ago to try our hand at workplace,
Yeah, right.
and ended up we got a bit of work in Canada in particular. New York was a bit kind of cutthroat, but we had about 7 or 8 people there at one point, and then COVID hit, and so there was no work, and the
Got
team there went around with when the riots were on and all the shops were hoarded up with plywood. They collected the plywood because it was all getting thrown out. So, and it had all this kind of beautiful graffiti on it and stuff. And so our team went round with a U-Haul and like collected all of the plywood. And we'd been testing kind of modular meeting rooms and things for workplace. And so they developed this kind of kit of parts approach to plywood
Oh my God.
design. And so they came up with this idea of creating outdoor furniture, because during COVID, New York was allowed to put restaurants out on the street to
Yeah.
stop, obviously, the spread of COVID. And so they came up with a modular system of outdoor dining and seats, and it all had this kind of beautiful graffiti on it and stuff as well initially. And then New York changed the rules to allow that to be a permanent piece. So it's now evolved actually into a product. So we have a product called Reply, and they did 70 restaurants this year.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. What
I
a
know.
successful Okay. Wow.
70 restaurants, but now it's not using plywood because that's actually not very sustainable when it's not just
Yeah.
lying around. So now it's kind of recycled plastic and metal as well.
Incredible.
So that was New York, and so we don't really work on architectural projects over there. We just have this product. And then James Gross started the London studio probably about 8 years ago or so, 9 years ago, because we had some workplace work there. And we also have had like a big culture of lots of Europeans in the studio over time. There was, at one point, there were more Italians than there were anybody else. So a lot of people kind of going back to Europe. And we had one that was German, had gone back and wanted to be in the UK. So that kind of
Right.
started the UK studio. And about 4 years ago now, I think, Matthew moved over there permanently. And we've been pursuing health work in the UK, and we've just actually got some health works. There's quite a big pipeline of,
Wow.
and that's a space we have a lot of expertise in. So we've got some workplace work there now, and a university building and some hospital work.
Yeah, okay. So using saying, if you don't mind me asking, how do you find that as an Australian company going to, we're small, we actually do punch above our weight in design,
Mm.
but I'm interested in that cutthroat you find of New York, because often when people go to Sydney, they're like, oh, it's very transactional versus, the more colloquial kind of Adelaide, Brisbane sort
Yeah.
of style like that. and it can be a bit more, it's different. Every region has its own ways of doing things and own little cultures in themselves. How was that? I'm interested in whether it was New York or whether it was, Canada. It's interesting why you've picked up certain things and you found relationships and how you find that versus London and the UK. Because Australia, obviously, we're a bit more self-deprecating, like English,
Yes. Yeah.
and there is it versus this American influence and
I
how
think
things
Canada,
operate.
I was talking to someone at WAM recently who was also saying that Canada, they've felt there's more sort of traction. It's quite aligned with
Way of
Australia.
doing business.
Yeah, but London, I think in the UK, I mean, London is such a micro kind of, it's so different to the rest of the UK.
Economy in the
But
entire
yeah, it's we've found that workplace was quite interesting because we have a long experience, sort of history of workplace design being more about this kind of idea of communities and habitats, and very much a place-based kind of response within a building. The experience when we got to the UK was that actually kind of fit out was a little bit soulless. The architects were focused on the building and less sort of considerate about how the
just building it for the
workplace
outside,
fit out
not the
was.
inside.
Yeah, well, sort of like this kind of investment in the thinking about creating different communities in the workplace fit out seemed to get some traction in terms of that being a bit of a different response to how we think about it. And I think education as well. We're doing a tertiary building there, and again, that kind of the thinking about the pedagogy driving a different way that you would fit the building out rather than just sort of rolling out typical classrooms. And so we've had a bit of a foot in the door with that. But I think also the scale of hospital work and being able to demonstrate delivery of something that's a sort of multi-billion-dollar beast, meet all the compliance. The UK hasn't done a lot of that work for a while, so there aren't very many architects that can kind of demonstrate that scale of work. And so that's the other end of the spectrum from workplace. But we've had to really go and spruik our wares. Like Matthew gets himself in every room and tries to talk to every contractor and everybody that he can, and it's probably taken a couple of years. But now our name's getting a bit more known, and I think it seems to be going quite well, which is good.
It's quite interesting because, we're this big but tiny country, but we are actually leading in a lot of things. As you said, we kind of go, what do you mean you wouldn't design to the pedagogy? Like, that's just what you do, right? Whereas it's simply like, oh, they haven't quite got to that point. So I think there's lots of things that we do here that obviously can be well translated. Well, I look forward to the next 100 years. We always finish off with, is there any books, podcasts, anybody that you listen to or things you find interesting that you would like to share for others to check out as well?
Gosh, well, if we're going to do a spruik, we are going to actually launch some design talks. So in terms of that kind of thinking about the legacy and learning from the architecture in the past, I'm kind of hopeful we'll be able to share some of that with others so that we can kind of spread that learning around.
That's incredible. Being a real giver. Well, I think that is fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your time and joining us. Really appreciated it.
Thank you, Seton.
What an extremely interesting conversation. I think Ali and I could have talked for ages. We missed a few things on talking on female leadership, and that I'm sure will come back at another time. But I think what was really interesting out of this conversation is there are some very unique parts that I believe that has made BVN successful. For example, having a culture that actually connects you through multi-generations, being very clear on who you are. There's an element of ethos, of continued improvement and development, going for the best that you can be, both for your clients in design, but as an organisation as a whole. So hopefully you've taken as much out of this conversation as I had, and do tune in. I think their design industry talks is going to be very interesting, both for designers and for people in industry as a whole.